All right, so we're continuing on in this story of Jonah. And we spent a couple weeks looking at Jonah 1. Last week we looked quickly at Jonah 2, and we talked about this idea of how the prayer, it's this beautiful prayer, and there's all these words, but that maybe it's just that Jonah's actions don't follow what he's actually saying. And so tonight we get to the part in the story where Jonah finally listens. So, as I was reading through this story about 30 times, because what I normally do is I read the story over and over again, whatever passage that I'm preaching on. And if it's in the New Testament, I do a loose translation in the Greek. If it's in the Hebrew, or in the Old Testament, I do the same with the Hebrew. And that's what I did this week. As I'm going over this passage over and over again, something popped into my mind. And my roommate from college, Steve, came to mind. And Steve introduced me to just this wonderful thing, Mission Impossible. Now, I know when I say Mission Impossible, you think of Jonah, because, who doesn't? So, the theme song has been stuck in my head, right? And the reason that I say that is because if you've seen any of the movies, I'm not a big Tom Cruise guy. But I do like him in Mission Impossible. I think he does very well in those. I could watch them over and over again. But every time he gets a message, the recording is exactly the same. Should you choose to accept this mission, ... and then the message blows up, right? But every single time, the message is exactly the same. Should you choose to accept the message? Finally, Jonah chooses to accept the message and the mission. And so, as we begin here, going back to verse 1, then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, that which I tell you." God uses the exact same wording as Jonah 1:2. The exact, arise, go. Hear me and go. You need to go do your job. I can only imagine how God is feeling with Jonah at this point. And parents, they probably have a really good idea, right? You ask your child to do the dishes. They're going to do the dishes, whether they like to or not. They can put up a bunch of fights, but they're going to do the dishes, whether they want to or not. And they may huff and puff all the way through it, but they're doing the dishes. And you walk out of the room and you're like, you could have saved a lot of time and energy if you just would have done it the first time I asked you, right? That's kind of what God is saying. I wouldn't have had to send this fish. Then you wouldn't have to been puked up. It could have been much, much easier, but you chose the difficult path. So verse 3, Jonah responds the same way that he did earlier, except he does the right thing this time. Verse 3, so Jonah arises and went to Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Now Nineveh was an exceedingly great city, 3 days' journey in breadth. And I had talked about how Nineveh was this really great city. And so to put it kind of in perspective, what is the nickname for Las Vegas?
Sin City.
Sin City. So Nineveh is like Las Vegas on steroids, right? I know that Vegas has tried to clean up their image, but all I have to do is say, what is the nickname of Vegas? And you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because for all these years, they've been known as Sin City. And that's exactly what Nineveh is. It's this great city that has a lot of problems. It's a very large city. It talks about how long it takes Jonah to get through it, right? It's a 3 days journey. It's a big, big city. Verse 4. Jonah began to go into the city, going a day's journey, and he called out, "Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown." So the first thing is, my translation says overthrown, and that's really kind of tame. essentially raining down fireballs is a more accurate depiction of what would have happened. And I know that this is a terrible question to ask in church, but have you ever in life wanted to see someone get it? Like, get what they deserve, right? It's okay. Everybody here is nodding their heads. It's okay. Be authentic. Be yourself. So I was sitting at the table, the dining room table on Friday night, and I'm trying to piece together the final parts of the sermon. And Beth is in the kitchen, and I say to Beth, I said, Beth, I'm going to talk about Office Space, the movie, in the sermon. And she was just like, what? Now, if you've never seen Office Space, it is a hysterical movie. I don't necessarily know that I should be endorsing it, but it is a funny, funny movie. And there's this character in there, and his name is Milton, right? And everyone just dumps on this poor guy, right? They're stealing his stapler. They want to move him down to the basement. And Milton has a couple of famous lines. He's like, but that's my stapler. That's my stapler. And then one of his really famous lines is he wants to burn the building down, right? He wants to burn the building down because he's had enough of the people that work there. And I'm sure that's exactly how Jonah felt, right? Jonah is probably skipping through the streets of Nineveh. You're going to die. You're going to die. This whole place going to go up in flames. And he's probably just really excited about this message that he's bringing to Nineveh. But what he forgets is that there's a 40-day grace period. See, he's all excited for God to be a God of judgment and God to just rain down fire. But he's missing the whole point of the message he's bringing: God's grace and God's mercy. So while he's skipping through the streets of Nineveh talking about how they're going to burn, verse 5, and the people of Nineveh believed God. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest of them to the least of them. I don't think that's what Jonah was looking for. In fact, as he's seeing this unfolding in front of him, he's probably like, oh, you know those Ninevites. They'll just do anything to get out of trouble. I don't even know that they mean it. Jonah really did not like these people. And so they do what he's not expecting. And we know that because, as we'll look at in 2 weeks, he sits back ready to watch the city burn. I don't think he genuinely believed that. So the story continues. Verse 6, the word reached the king of Nineveh, and he arose from his throne, removed his robe, covered himself with sackcloth and ashes, and he issued a proclamation. Did you ever notice how quickly bad news spreads? Right? Think about when there's downsizing at a company. It goes through really quick. So this news is spreading through the city so fast. I mean, think of where the king normally is in a city. This news is spreading so quickly, it makes its way all the way to the king. And the king is like, oh boy, what have we done? Issues this proclamation that no one, not even animals, are going to eat or drink. We need to fast. We need to put on sackcloth. We're in trouble. And it's enough that in verse 10 we see that God hears them. And God believes them. And God shows mercy on them. And in fact, in verse 3 we have where God says, I'm not going to do this. God relents. God's not going to destroy the city. Being a parent is a difficult thing, isn't it? There's a fine line between grace and judgment, right? Grace and discipline. Because if you never discipline your child, they're going to know when you say that you're going to that it's just words and they'll do whatever. But you can't just discipline them all the time. You have to give them a chance. Right? I want to share a story with you about when I was younger and I went out to eat, believe it or not. Occasionally I misbehaved. I know. You're as shocked as I am. I still became a pastor. It's crazy. So my family, we didn't go out to eat a whole lot when I was younger. And my sister Amanda and I were about 4 years apart. And we went out and we were really acting up. I mean, I can't remember what it was about or anything like that. But what I do know is because we went out maybe only once a week or so, that when we went out, it was something special. And so my dad looked at us this night and said, if you don't stop, we're going home. Well, my sister and I, we look at each other and we decide we're going to keep doing what we're doing. My dad wasn't kidding. Now, is my dad mean? Is he being this great disciplinarian? No, he gave us grace. He gave us that opportunity to be able to act the way that we should have, where we're not carrying on and being a disruption to the entire restaurant. And that's what God does in this situation. God looks at Nineveh and says, you have to be accountable for your actions. But I will give you time to genuinely turn things around. And God gets what he wants. Jonah, on the other hand, is going to be a little disappointed. But I think that you and I can relate to Jonah very, very well. I want to share a story about a gentleman and the supermarket. And I envision that many of us have this exact same problem. So a gentleman, he gets off of work and he goes to the supermarket and he's picking up all of these groceries that he needs to be able to make dinner. And so he's picking it up. And the worst part of grocery shopping isn't necessarily the actual grocery shopping. It's the end, right? If you're going up and down the aisles, every time you walk past, you glance over at the registers. You're trying to get the lay of the land, right? You don't want to get stuck in that one lane. No, see, you're laughing because you know I'm right. Well, he gets to the registers, and you can see the sweat pouring down, right? You can always tell when somebody's getting ready to make this big decision. So he gets to the lines, and he sees that only 2 lines are open, right? Whenever you go, there's only 2 lines open, and there's 50 people that are trying to, cash out. And so he looks and he sees, the woman that has enough for the feeding of the 5,000. And then he sees the mom with these kids that are climbing over everywhere. He says, I'm doing self-checkout. Okay. They're great, right? Please scan your item. Please place your item in the bag. Stop. Please place your item in the bag. I already did that. Right? So he's getting worked up. He's getting upset. See, you're laughing because you can relate to this gentleman. So he's getting upset and he's trying to scan these eggs and these eggs just won't scan. And he is just so livid at this point. He puts the eggs in the bag and just walks out. And he says, I deserve these eggs. After what I've been through, I deserve these eggs. Now, I'm by no means telling you that you should go to the grocery store and do that. And if you get stopped, say, oh, my pastor said I could do this. Please don't do that. But I share that story because that's a common time when we get frustrated and upset. What is it about us as humans that we get so upset over everything? We get upset at people. We get upset at circumstances. And we get upset at God. Primarily because we have to deal with difficult questions. So I want to talk about one of these difficult questions to close. Jonah probably asked himself, why are good things happening to bad people? And why, I can't really answer that question without answering the other one as well. Why do bad things happen to good people? If you haven't wrestled with that yourself, you probably know people who have. So I just have 3 quick points to try to help give some understanding to this. First is that without pain and suffering, we truly can't understand what thankfulness is. One of my mentors, it was John Longmire. And he's the pastor at Hempfield United Methodist Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, actually in Mannheim. And he preached a sermon. I don't remember too many Thanksgiving sermons, but he preached one that Thanksgiving is about suffering. And I'm like, Pastor John, I respect you a lot, but where are you going with this? Because when I gather around the table with my family, suffering is not the first thing that comes to mind. But he's right. Because without the difficult times in my life, I wouldn't really know how to appreciate the good things that I have, and I wouldn't know who to give the thanks to if I didn't have those difficult times. Second, as Methodists, we believe in this beautiful gift of free will, where we have the option of being in this relationship with Christ, that we have this option of worshiping God. If you force someone to marry you, probably not going to be very pleasant, right? There's going to be a lot of resentment. There's going to be a lot of unhappiness. Because God is love, and because God loves us, God gave us the gift of free will. And for that to be limited, it's taking away the gift. The gift has no meaning. Free will. Lastly, context with events. Picture for a moment you enter a hospital waiting room. And in the waiting room you can hear a woman screaming in pain. And across the room there's family members that make their way over to you and they have smiles on their faces and they say, "You hear that woman? That's my daughter. Oh, I'm so happy." And you look at them and you're like, "Are you crazy? Do you not hear her screaming in pain?" And they look at you and say, "Yeah, she's giving birth to her first child." Now, you understand their side, don't you? You know why they're smiling. You know why they're happy, because they know the outcome on the other end. Context makes everything. And it's true in life. Different circumstances, you and we may not fully be able to understand them in that moment. But when we're able to take a step back and we look at everything, when you add in context, maybe you understand a little more. So what do? We have 2 options. First is we can be like Jonah. We can sit and pout and do absolutely nothing and be really upset. Or we can be the hands and feet of Christ. Because we live in a world that needs the love of Christ. And we can bring it to them. Amen.